at Amazon. Been there just over 4 years now, um, and learned a lot doing that. And I've had a lot of experience in a bunch of different places. I was the kind of person who left high school, didn't go to college. I drove trucks. I flipped houses. I did all kinds of crazy stuff. Ended up in a help desk slash network engineering role, and kind of worked my way up. So I have a really broad skill set, which I think has helped me a lot in my development, because it's not just about writing code; it's about engineering solutions. So I'm going to talk about a little bit of that, how that fits into AI, especially now, because it's becoming less about writing code and syntax and languages, and more about the architectures and the engineering the actual solution, being able to scale things like that. Um, so I'll talk about a couple of products today, but really just understand that most of these rules and the things I'll talk about, they apply to LLMs in general. And I'll kind of try and make the distinction where it's agentic versus just the LLM itself. Um, and also, there's so many tools out there that do the same thing, right? There's Cursor, which I'm going to talk about mainly because that's my favorite. There's Claude Code. There's Google's anti-gravity. There's Codex. Those are kind of the bigger ones. Amazon has Kiro, which just came out, which we use internally. I'm building one. There's Kilo Code. I'll show the one I'm building at the end here a little bit. Still super early, but it works. So again, most of the stuff I'm going to talk about applies to all of those. Could apply to the chat you're having with ChatGPT. I'm going to try and help you understand how the LLM works in the background, how that ties into what you're talking about, how the prompts affect it. Kind of get in deep in a couple of places, but mostly I'll stay high level so I think everybody can understand whether you're a developer or not. So I'll start off with the biggest one, context. So context is basically what you're giving the agent, or what you're giving the LLM. So when you're having a conversation with ChatGPT or talking with Cursor or whatever the case may be, you have a context window, and that window is how many tokens the LLM can handle. And tokens, for a rough estimate, is characters divided by 3. Um, and so, for example, Codex 5.3 just came out as I believe, 200,000. I'll use Opus because I know that one for sure. Opus 4.6. That one has a 200,000 token context window, which means about 600,000 characters. That's your limit, right? So once you get to the end of that, it'll actually give you an error, and so you can't give anymore. So either the tool you're using has to start trimming that context off and just not even send it, or it has to summarize it, which is what a lot of the tools do. They'll start to roll up at the end of your conversation into a summary. And this is why you see when you have really long conversations with ChatGPT or any of those tools that things start to get weird. It starts to not understand what you were originally talking about. When ChatGPT, that chat interface first came out, it was just rolling off. And so whatever the original request was is gone. And it wasn't very clear to the user that that was happening. So you'd end up with this whole conversation. Then all of a sudden you're like, wait, but we talked about this 5 minutes ago. And now you have, yeah. So that's what happens. So now we have auto summarization. We have pruning, where it'll actually go and kind of prune different things out of the context. So we'll talk about all of that. But that's the overarching rule, is that context is kind of the limiting factor to LLMs right now. When you get into like Sonnet has a 1 million context, that means 3 million characters. It's a lot. Opus 4.6, sorry, I misspoke earlier. Opus 4.5 is 200,000. Opus 4.6 is now 1 million. But there's caveats that come with that. And I won't get down into like the math of things, but when you have a really long context, you start to lose the original training of the model. You start to lose the strength of your prompt, the strength of the system prompt, mathematically in the LLM. So when you get to these really long code bases, or I'm sorry, really long context windows, they're great, and they're getting better all the time, right? Opus 4.6 is pretty good, even at 700 or 800,000 tokens. It's pretty solid, but you really start to slip away from the system prompt that you gave it, or the agent prompt that you gave it. So when you're working with these different modes in Cursor, or the different tools that Cursor uses, you'll notice as you start to get closer and closer to that million, it starts to screw up more and more and more and more, because it's actually lost the original instructions, which are thousands of tokens up, right? Um, So that's probably the most important thing to understand and really think about when you're having those conversations and you're starting to fill up the context, which I'll show in a little bit here. But um, once you're starting to get to the end, if like something just isn't working, stop, start a new conversation. And there's a couple options. You can tell that current conversation, hey, I want to summarize this conversation and give me something I can copy and paste. My go-to is put this into a code block because you can just click the little copy button. And then you can take that, start a new conversation, and start the conversation over right from that point. And when you're using agentic tools like Cursor, it's just going to go and investigate the investigate the code base again. It's going to search through your code. It's going to look for, what that previous agent was touching, things like that. Again, a lot of the agentic tools like Cursor, Cloud Code, Codex, they do auto summarization now. Cursor's completely blind. You don't even see it. But it happens, and you can watch the context count go all the way up, and then it'll go down, and then it'll go all the way up again, and then it'll go down. And so it's doing that summarization, but you have to be aware of that because when you've summarized 3, 4, 5 times, your initial conversation is gone. You might as well start over, right? So breaking things down into small bits is absolutely key, or having one main conversation, having it write a markdown document to do some number of tasks or a plan or whatever, and then putting that into a different conversation to burn a bunch of tokens, and then to go back to the main conversation is a really good loop. And that's what's starting to happen with the Cloud Code agent swarms. Cursor has some sub-agent type stuff. That's what they're doing, is they're trying to offload some of that context into a different thread and then get a little summary back, and then offload a little bit and then get a summary back. Because that main conversation is the project that you're trying to achieve or the task that you're trying to achieve. And so the more context you can save in that conversation, the better it's going to do. All right, talk about agents. This is an agentic specific topic. So in all these tools, you have different agent types or agent modes. Some of them are very baked in. So like with Cursor, these are your options. That's it. You have agent mode, which is just kind of a general coding mode. You have a plan mode, which is a very specific mode where it's going to write you a plan. That's basically all it's good at. It's not going to edit code. It's not going to do anything else. It's going to write you a plan to do whatever the thing is you want to do. You have a debug mode, which is very nitty gritty as far as building itself a debug loop, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But it's much more aggressive at working down into a specific problem. I usually only use that when I have a problem that I really can't solve after 3, 4, 5 exchanges. I'll start a new conversation. I'll give it the error message and say, hey, work this problem, and it will go to town. And then ask mode, most of the tools have this kind of mode. It's a read-only mode. Basically means don't touch my code base. You can see it, read it, but you can't actually touch anything. I put it down here a little bit, but my preferred way to work is ask, plan, do. And then the rest of those steps, which we'll talk about. But ask, I will say, okay, I'm looking to add this feature, right? Identify all of the places in the code where you need to touch in order to implement this feature. So it's just going to do a scan of your code base. It's going to find, the entry points to whatever it is you're trying to add, and make note of all those. Then I'm going to move to plan mode. Now it's got all the context of the code that it just read. It looked specifically at the item that you want to implement. And now I'm going to go to plan mode and go, okay, now let's write a plan to implement this feature. And it's going to write a plan. I'll do that real quick just so you understand. So this is a blank, empty code base. What we're going to do, let's make a plan to create a chat. Now, if I was actually doing this, this would be more like a paragraph. Better? Yeah, it's a little fuzzy. So if this were a real thing, I would have much more text in here. I'd have a paragraph. I like to use structured text. So for example, use React, use Next.js. I like bullet points. I like numbered lists because it gives it a very clear, this is what I want, right? It's going to turn that into a plan, and it's going to use those as what I call success criteria. It's going to say, in order for this plan to be successful, those are the things that I need to hit on. So we're going to go ahead and just execute on this. And you'll see it's going to pop up a plan here in a second. It's going to look and see that there's really no code in here. It's going to see all of my notes and be like, what is he doing? There's your context 7 that you were talking about. Flashed real quick, but you mentioned context 7. That is a very good MCP server. Context 7 is a public site that has documentation for every single GitHub library in existence, basically. If it doesn't have it, it grabs it on the fly, which is cool. And it does a markdown document dump of all the libraries that you can grab. Super handy. I don't know if it has anything outside of coding. I haven't tried. We will talk about MCP servers in a little bit. All right, so Christian's going to ask me some questions now. So this is one of the things it does during plan mode, but it can also do it during all of the other modes. So it's just going to be interactive. If you want to trigger it to do this, which I encourage, if you're building a feature, for example, I'll say, be inquisitive or interview me about this feature. Or think about all of the options that are possible and ask me what features I might be interested in. And so it's going to ask me a bunch of questions here. So what type of chat app? We'll do an AI chat app. Why not? Just in backend, build a new backend. It's interesting that it picked that up. I must have a link in there somewhere to that. Yeah, so build a new backend. All right. So I was looking up documentation probably for Next.js, and you can actually go in here and see exactly what it called. So yeah, it's looking up how to build a Next.js app from GitHub. Let's see what else it pulled down. Pulled up an AI SDK from Vercel. So it's basically just building library database. So Prisma ORM database, that's a Postgres wrapper for Node.js. It's looking at the use chat hook from Vercel. So you can kind of see what the agent is doing here. So each one of these things is what's called a tool call in AI speak or in the LLM speak. I'll dig more into that in a minute. But you can kind of drill in and see all of the different tools that it used during its thinking process, and how it came to its conclusions. It read a file here, so you can click on that file and see the file that it read for whatever the reason it did. And here's my plan. So it gave me the little architecture that it's going to do. So we've got, oh, that is awful. There we go. Okay. Yeah, so we got, so that's starting from the client, which is a good way to work backwards from the client, right? We got the chat page, we got messages, we got a chat input, we've got the API on the back end. The API is going to hit the database, and then it's going to do a SQLite database locally, and then it's going to hit OpenAPI or OpenAI's API for the AI step of it. It's going to give you all the project setup, database. So this kind of thing, even if it's a simple feature, having it this is basically building you a prompt, right? It's building you a very thorough, very extensive prompt. The key is you have to read it. I've seen a lot of people just go, yeah, build it. Which, you know what? If you're building something for proof of concept or doing, moving fast and breaking things kind of stuff, absolutely. If you're building an app that's going to be an enterprise app, something you're going to publish, you really do have to sit and read. Can anybody tell me what would not work about this in a enterprise or production environment? No? So what about this architecture would not work in a production environment or an enterprise environment? Bingo. Who said that? There you go. He's the winner. So SQLite is a local embedded database. You can run it on a small scale, but you can't connect multiple servers to it. There's a lot of little limitations. It's an excellent database for like small embedded devices. Your phone probably has 46,000 SQLite databases on it. Not even a joke. But not something you can use in production. So again, there's an example of something that would not work, right? So I'm going to come in here and say SQLite is a bad idea. Let's push this to enterprise app. See what it comes up with. All right, we'll let that run for a minute. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit more about what's happening here in terms of the actual communication between us and the LLM. There's a lot going on in the middle. most important thing is there's a couple different prompt types. You have the system prompt, you have user messages, you have assistant messages, which apparently left off here, and tool uses. The system prompt is the most important one. It is mathematically weighted heavier when the LLM gets your request. So it is the strongest push towards a specific architecture, towards a specific behavior of the chat, towards specific tool use, things like that. In Cursor, you can't change it. If you're building an agentic app, though, it is critical. You absolutely need to get that right. In a tool, no, nope. Their harness, as they call it, which is the collection of system prompt and their agent prompts, are baked in. You can't change it. Root code, kilo code, Klein, a few others, you can change it. And you can get really custom with it. What's that? It's not. It is out there because people have gotten out of it, but it's not open. Then you have user messages and assistant messages. So obviously that's your message and the LLM's message back and forth. And then you have tool uses. And for most providers at this point, they're separate things. It used to be in like early OpenAI API, it was you basically had to prompt the LLM to give you JSON back or some sort of structured text back. XML was very popular, JSON was popular. So you had to tell it, hey, I want you to do this thing in this very specific format. And it was terrible. It was not good at it at all. Nowadays, all of these models are trained in order to use that specific harness and use that specific language. So Anthropic, Claude Code, Sonnet, Opus, and Haiku are the only one that actually have trained in and have baked in tool use into the model. The rest of them are still using a language-based in and out. They obviously have a lot of mechanisms in the middle to make it properly formatted and things like that. But it's an interesting note that they are the only ones that have actually trained it into their model, which is why I think they're doing so well in the training, in the coding space, because it's all about tool use. Tool use can be anything like reading files, writing files, replacing, which is just an edit. Basically, it's finding a string and editing a string. Glob, which is searching for files. grep, which is searching the contents of files. Semantic search, which is a vector-based database search of code, meaning every line of code in this database or in this code base is in a database that the agent can search. So it can search for things like, authentication function with just that verbiage, and it'll actually return code that has something to do with authentication function. That is a Cursor first thing. They're not the only ones that do it now. Claude Code still doesn't do it, which surprises me. It makes the agent be able to find things very quickly and say, you say, I want to add authentication. It's going to go, oh, it's already here. Whereas a lot of other like Codex and Claude Code might just add a whole nother authentication stack to your app because it didn't look well enough. So it's an interesting point that Cursor's still the only one that uses that. We also have browser tools. So in Cursor, we have this little browser button here. So I can turn this on and then have it actually go browse a page, look through the page just like a human, do whatever you want it to do. It can have access to network calls, the contents of those network calls, which is super important for development. Timing, so like how long it took something to load. It can induce errors, so it can, block access to an API, run the thing and see how it works. It can click buttons. It can read all the accessibility stuff, all that kind of stuff. It's really good in the development space for testing your front end. It can even take screenshots. So if you want to change the style of something, it actually understands what you mean. Like, hey, I want to move this button over here. Still has as much trouble as humans do with CSS, but that'll never change. All right, so it switched out SQLite to Postgres, added direct URL. So we'll go back to my plan here and see what it changed. Just bigger. All right. Oh, look, it had authentication after I told it to be an enterprise app, right? Didn't have that before. Added Postgres, all that kind of stuff. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit go, see what happens. So Cursor has the option of a bunch of different models. This one they just released 4 days ago, 5 days ago, and it is 6x over the weekend. It does not. Nope. Nope. Kilo Code does all that, and so does the one I'm writing. It does, yeah. Yep. Yep. Yes. Yep. It has most of the major models it has access to now. But if you want to use like Olama at home for some lightweight task, can't do it. Um, Generally speaking, when I'm building in here, I use either Opus 4.6, which is very expensive, or GPT 5.3 Codex that just came out. That's actually very good. It's very comparable. They are very different models. They are both very capable. It's really interesting to build a plan in one and then have the other audit it, or vice versa, and kind of go back and forth. Like, hey, somebody wrote this plan. Give me red team it, or give me your thoughts on it. Using multiple models is one of the advantages of having Cursor, because if you're using Claude Code, it's all their models. If you're using Codex, it's all their models. Cursor has access to a bunch, so you get a bunch of different opinions on things, which I think is super important. You can, yeah. Yep. Yep. There's also like team and enterprise accounts for Cursor, so you can manage that as a company. Mhm. It's tough because you don't know what model you're getting. Um, for a while, it was free, and because they were using their Composer One behind the scenes, and it was free because you were training them. um, but yeah, it's tricky. I go back to it a lot, especially when I just want to do a code review, or I want to do something that's like I'm moving, like I was talking about moving the buttons around. Like I use auto for that because they charge you much less for auto. That's a rule in Cursor. If you can use auto, it's cheaper. Um, but like 5.3 Codex is not terribly expensive, and it's really good. I have had a back and forth with like how much time do I want to spend cleaning up after the agent, and how many tokens do I want to spend cleaning up after an agent, because one bug can really get you sideways for a while. So that using that extra step, at work, we've gotten very much into the habit of just using Opus 4.6 all the time. But we're paying for it. This is a very large bill. But with Sonnet, it does most of it really good. It's just every once in a while it'll just do something weird, and it just won't catch it, and it ends up costing me time and tokens. And so I'm just like on the fence, like, is it worth that time? I don't know. I think it. I think the honest answer is it changes every week. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. And that's very true, especially if you're doing proof of concept or a quick build or something like that. Auto every time. The composer models are not that great, like on the benchmarks and stuff like that, but they're extremely fast. And so you can get away with like having a few problems, but it's so fast it doesn't matter. It's just when you get into the weeds on a problem, that's I start to look at it and go, do I just scratch this and start over with Opus again? So it's a little bit of that weighing, what are you doing with it? At work, we're building enterprise apps that need to be secure, they need to work well. Like I use higher level models. If I'm building a production product, I'm probably going to use a higher level model most of the time. Um, Not to put my personal stuff out there, but last weekend I spent $800 on Cursor, mostly on Opus because I'm building something. But I needed that. Yeah. Yes. Like the Quen coder is excellent. It's an excellent model. Yep. And now that the yep, neutrino. Yeah, they those models are definitely getting way better. And they're like, I would put most of those models up against like Sonnet 4, which is not that long ago. It's like 4 months ago. So we're definitely getting to the point where you can run that stuff on your own hardware. It's a lot slower, but like again, when I want to do code reviews, that's what I use, Quen, and I'll just let it go. Takes an hour, but whatever. Yeah. Yep. That was probably equivalent wise, or are you saying actual? Probably, yeah, 30-ish. Yep, couple solid days. Yep. What's that? No, nope. At work, they pay for all of it. This is outside of work. It does a little bit. Yeah, it's a big bill. Like I think my record was $3,000 in a day because I'm actually working on 5 projects at once at work right now, and so I can prompt, 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 prompt. And if you haven't used Opus 4.6, it's kind of slow, but yeah, yeah. So I use spaces on OS X, so I can go between multiple projects. So I have this kind of thing going on at work. Gets confusing sometimes. Oh, I do it all the time. Yeah. Honestly, so one of the invaluable features of Cursor that a bunch of other tools don't have for whatever reason is this little magic button right there. I can revert my changes, which undoes the conversation and or also the code. Mm-hmm. Yep. 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 All right. I'm gonna let that build and do its thing. So planning and tasks, kind of talked about that a little bit. The way I do things at work, I think I talked about this when I talked about Cursor the last time a couple months ago. Um, I go kind of beyond what Cursor does for planning, and I actually have it write tasks because I think it keeps it much more focused. I have found that sometimes it just goes, yeah, this is all done, and it's not. But I have a rule here, and I'll share some of these prompts at the end. I have a repo you can grab them from if you're interested. Uh, tasks. So this is kind of the format that I use. So I will give it this and say, okay, take the plan that you just wrote and now write me tasks, detailed tasks for that plan. And you can also say, keep it to 100 lines. You can say, make it 500 lines, and it'll get into detail of like variable names if you push it, which can actually be really useful for documentation later. But what it'll do is build a huge task list of all these things, and then I can say, okay, go ahead and execute on this task list. And if it numbers it, if it has it all numbered, you can say run task 1 through 4. Um, and so that's one thing I'll talk about here is how to break things up. I don't. I don't. Um, I use the plan as that basically. There's a bunch of tools that use that as a two-step process, and I don't see the need because yeah, yeah, sure, yeah. I I guess that's fair. I usually have requirements, right? Because I'm a developer for an organization. I get them, so maybe that's where that is missed. But even for my own kind of stuff, I will build requirements for the specific feature. And then I sometimes will have a higher level project document I'll talk about rules in a minute, but so this is like a project overview. This is of my AI agent. But I have this that basically gets applied to every single conversation that I send. So every time I click send, it's tagging this along with it. And it's just a project overview, basically, of whatever the project is. Just kind of has what libraries are using, where some things are. I'm not going to go into all of it says. Some specific uh, coding rules that I like or whatever. Um, so yeah, as far as like breaking things up, I think it's important to really think about those, again, your context size, right? All goes back to context. If whatever you're writing can't fit into that 200K context window or your million context window, whatever it is, then you really need to rethink what you're doing, because if you run out, things are going to go sideways, right? You can get away with more, especially with tools like Cursor. It's going to start summarizing, it's going to prune some stuff, but the quality always, always, always is going to go down the more context you're using. So the more you can break it down and say, okay, now I've made a plan, I've made my list of tasks. The plan might have phases or whatever you want to call them, stages, phases. Now I'm going to take that plan and go into a new conversation and say, hey, you're going to execute on phase number 1. When you're done, give me a summary of all the files you touched, anything you've implemented, and a summary for the project manager. And I phrase it just like that, because a developer is going to do that, right? They're going to give their status report back to either their manager, the project manager, whatever. And so when it's done with that stage, it's going to give me that little summary. Now I can take that summary, go back to the main chat that I did the plan in, and say, here's the summary from phase 1. Give me a summary for an agent for phase 2. And so this is kind of the manual way that I've been doing this. This is all starting to be automated by these tools, but we're still kind of on the edge of that, where like Claude Code has their sub-agents. So it'll take a task, a phase, and send it off into a sub-agent. And Cursor's starting to have that too a little bit. Let me see if it actually triggered any here. Not yet. It'll show up kind of in a box like this one, and it'll say, explored or, task or whatever. So yeah, I think just splitting things up into reasonable chunks is important. And think of it in terms of like, how much code is this going to be? Because your tokens are how much it's writing and how much it's reading.
So how do you manage? Because the output consumes the token.
Correct. Input and output. Yep. Yep.
Something it's like 50%.
That's a good rule of thumb. Yeah.
When the output is excessive.
You can't, basically, is the best answer.
I get that. So I have the going as far as to tell one and force like solid things like that.
Yeah.
Start knowing precisely what happens with the scope. So I mean, you want to scope it down, but sometimes so the scope of the process. So you want to make one procedure, for example,
yep.
Right? But it requires the scope and understanding of more, and its output also will exceed that. You know what I mean? So you can try to scope it down, but some things require a broader understanding, especially in systemics, like system whole scope. Target task that it doesn't run.
Yeah. So when you get into like a bigger project like that, the best way I can put it is break it down further. Like, so we get yelled at work if I have a task that I say is going to take me 2 weeks. They just literally will say, no, it won't. You need more tasks, right? We have to break it down into smaller chunks. And I recognize what you're saying. Like, you still need that higher level architecture or that higher level context of this is what the project is doing. I guess the best way to answer that is the way that these tools work is it's very good at sniping out the information that it needs, right? So if you have documents in your code base that have that information in it, it will be able to find it. So it can break out, like it's going to do a semantic search for, what's the authentication for this application, right? And so it's going to find that paragraph or chunks of paragraphs in your documentation for authentication.
So, like I've seen the White Combinator guidelines.
Yeah.
So one of them, like the number one top list is monolithic.
Yeah.
So and context.
Yep.
So as I break it up, then it becomes semi-spaghetti, because we didn't originate all the thoughts.
Yep.
So the interactions of all these pieces, right? Especially as passing objects to them, structures,
Yep.
and so we begin to lose track of the thing.
Yep.
Right. So like,
And so does ALM. I really don't, because that you have that limit, right? You have that context limit. So that's it. You have 200,000 tokens to work with, and that's it. So that's where the million comes in, and Grok code is now up to 2 million. 2 million, yeah. Yep. I think it's, I don't know, code fast is 2 million so far, but.
Where I had a big project in one file, it just got so bad that I started learning more of microservices and split them up to a part. And then I can tell the AI, hey, we're focusing on this microservice. That way it can work better. And if it wanted to start talking too much, eventually the chat will crash. You start having error, you open new chat, say, hey, please summarize, and you can read and the.
Yep.
That chunk of pieces and each does their thing,
Yep.
And with Rabbit and that way they can talk to each other.
Yep. Yeah.
Right now, plan it out. Also plan it out what they do this. Find some other reasons project. Yes, design such ways.
Yep. It's smart, but it's like, I call it a goldfish. I call it a goldfish because it has really bad short-term memory, right? It's all you got. Yes. All right. So now we'll talk about some cursor-specific stuff that they kind of did first, but a lot of other people have copied. So Cloud Code has it, and Codex has it, Anagrada's got it, whatever. So we have commands, otherwise known as slash commands. When you're in a chat here, this, you can do slash, and it gives you a list of all these different options here. Some are built in to cursor, like create rule is built in. You can have it create a rule for you. These are all my commands that I've just kind of thrown in here just so we have examples. This is one of my favorites, which is super handy. What's that? So they're just markdown documents. Yep. Exactly. So .cursor / commands. So you have commands, hooks, rules, and skills now. And you just throw them in here. So, and then in the cursor settings, they're in there as well. Yep. And when you edit it, it live updates in cursor. There, honestly, YouTube is where I've learned a lot of this stuff because yeah, there's a lot out there. Yep. And so commands specifically, this is really just handy for stuff that you need to do frequently. This tasks one started as a command, but I actually use it as a rule now. This is just an example of like, I was trying to make changes to a tab bar over and over again. And so I would use this. And so you can come in here and do / tab bar. And it's going to automatically paste all of this context into your chat. So it's just a really quick way for things you do all the time. At work, I have a lot that are like, run this command to run the build, run this command to check types, linting, that sort of stuff. Repeated actions is really useful for that. If you do PRs or CRs, PRs, whatever you want to call them, committing code, I have one for that. So I'll just hit slash commit, and then it'll ask me, what branch do you want to commit to? Do you want to commit all the code or just the code we just changed today? Are there any merges you have to pull in? And do you want to create a CR? So it'll do all of that for you based on a prompt that I designed. So I don't have to type all that out every time. So if you're working on a project, it's super handy to just keep building these as you go. Sometimes I get in the habit of not doing that. And after the fourth or fifth time I do something, I'm like, that should be a slash command. Let's see. We'll talk about rules next. Rules are probably the most powerful thing that Cursor has. I don't even know if other ones have it at this point. I think Kiro does. I'm not sure about Cloud Code. I have not used Cloud Code a lot to know. But basically what this does is, again, it automatically attaches this context to your chats. So if you look down here, come on, you can see active rules. So that's just my project overview. So that automatically gets attached regardless of what happens. And then if you put a glob in here, now anytime the agent reads or writes or touches any files in that directory, it's going to automatically attach this to the context for the rest of the chat. So I think this is extremely powerful for things like UI design systems, build commands, like, hey, you're in this directory, you need to use a special build command. Dependencies, for at work, we have dependencies that we have to do special builds for. So I need to tell it like, hey, you're editing here, you need to run this build command before you run this build command. And again, it's automatic. So I don't have to think about it. It just gets attached automatically. Yep. 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 And so if you have, and a function that it has touched a couple of times and you don't want it to touch it, or, a type that you don't want to change, like we have API surfaces that are, public to our customers, and I can't have it change that. So I'll have a rule that says, don't change this API surface, and it'll automatically tell the agent that, so that it'll stop and be like, wait, well, we need to. So what are we going to do, Sometimes, yeah. I would say not terribly often, because usually the way I do it is if I have different chunks of the application, like an API, and the infrastructure, the front end, I'll have one rule for each of those things, and then I just can, because it's going to get attached anyway. So I'll put whatever rules are relevant to that, and then I'll have a product level one. So usually they don't step on each other. I do sometimes have a TypeScript or Python or whatever, and so it's just startup pi, right? So any Python file in my environment, you need to use this build command, for example. What is it? Oh, lovable. Yeah, yeah. Yep, yep. And with the commands, we have a create rule. So we can just come down here and say, create me a rule for TypeScript with, coding best practices, unit test rules, code coverage, build commands, type linting, all that kind of stuff. And it'll just build that rule for you. So you don't have to think about it. No, that's in Cursor. Yep. No. Yep. Yep. There's a yeah, there's a lot. I use those for it to explain to me what's happening, because I want to make sure that it understands. So like I'll say, hey, build a plan to do X, Y, and Z. And then once it's done, I'll say, now write me a document or write me a diagram to explain the architecture of this application or the architecture of this feature. Yeah, exactly. And so I'm the upper management. And the LLM is the junior engineer that is going to implement it. Right. So I want to make sure that it understands thoroughly what the application is or what the architecture is. Um, Yeah, so rules are also called steering. So like in Kiro, they call it steering documents. It's a little bit different. It doesn't have the globbing rules. It has some You can pull it in with hooks and a few other things, but same concept. If you hear rules or steering, they're kind of the same thing. It's just a way to nudge the agent closer to what you want to do. And importantly, that is in the system prompt. So it is one of the stronger rules, right? So it's not just a user message in the rest of your conversation. It gets attached to the system prompt. Some of it does.
What they should do and not do.
Interesting question because it depends on the model. So all of the Anthropic models love Markdown. They just love to write Markdown documents in all caps. I don't know where the heck that came from or why, but I literally, in every tool that I use, I have a rule that says do not write Markdown documents unless I ask specifically, because it just burns tokens. And one of the comments, or one of the words I have on here is doc rot. That's what we started calling it at work, because you'll be building a feature, and then, especially in the early hours of a project, you've got 15 Markdown documents. Literally none of those are relevant by the time you're 2 days in, right? Because you've got 20,000 more lines of code. So we call it doc rot because they're useless at that point. What I prefer is once you get closer to a production state, or like he was talking about with the microservices, that's an excellent architecture. That's exactly what we do at work. You take that microservice, and you document that service by itself, and then we package that up with the code. Yep, and that becomes part of the rules. So now when it touches those files, it automatically gets that rule attached and knows exactly the architecture that's there. Yep.
Same way as in Photoshop, you can buy the
I've seen people try, but to be honest, like, I have a bunch you can take from here. They're marginally useful because we all do things so much differently, right? We have in different environments and stuff like that. And because the models are changing so fast, everything is changing. So the whole workflow is changing so fast. And this whole workflow I'm talking about is going to be useless in 6 months. I mean, that's the reality. Yeah. Yep. Yep.
dentist office with a young college grad able to come in and set up cursor and everything else once a month, 5 hours, whatever it is, set them up so they can do whatever they.
Probably. Yeah. The key is keeping it up to date if things change. That's the tricky part. But I have an IT background, so like for them, stuff doesn't change, right? The IT architecture doesn't change. The business barely, there's minor changes, but not like not like the development world.
Local business that has somebody that's halfway to a developer, but really needs, somebody to guide them once a month. Something in that revenue stream for them and a plus for the business.
It's a tricky area to be in, especially right now, because there is a lot of danger in doing this stuff without having the systems background, or because, like exactly what you were talking about up here earlier, it's that last little mile that, if somebody accidentally exposes customer information, health information, payment information, it's that little bit. And we're just not quite there yet. Now, could you yes. Now, could you write rules to wrap that and, build a tool that had those limits on it? Probably. Yep. Only got a few minutes left, so I want to fly through a couple of these. MCP servers. This is something that people sell. Mostly it's free out there. They are little software packages that you can install on your machine that expose different tools to the agent. So we have all those different tool uses, right? Read files, write files, whatever. Let me see what I have installed. I have a handful of them installed here. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Cursor has grep, glob, read, write, replace, and then some browsing, and then the semantic search in the browsing tools. And that's pretty synonymous with most of the tools. So these MCP servers are, again, each one is a separate software package that you can either write yourself or you can download and install alongside your agent. Basically, any of these agentic tools have support for it. It's kind of an older one at this point. They're actually moving past this down to skills, which we'll talk about in a second. MCP was kind of a protocol that the LLM can speak to a backend tool in a unified way. The one big danger that I'll throw on here is every single tool that's enabled here gets sent with every single time you click send. The instructions are there. Yeah, tokens, burns tokens. So you see I have a, yeah, exactly. So all of these ones that I have disabled are because of that. So they're for specific projects. Context 7, highly recommend this for anybody who does development. It's extremely good. Yep, it goes and grabs the latest documentation. It's excellent. It's open and free. Yep. Cargo is a Rust thing. Then I have backend logs. I wrote this one for one of my applications. It actually gives the agent access to read logs, so it can get backend logs or truncate the log file. And so I have a loop that basically says run this tool, which is the truncate tool, and then run the program, and then run get logs. So now it has a fresh logs from my API. And it just built that. I just said, hey, I need you to build an MCP server that does this. And so now all of a sudden the agent has another tool to its, at its beck and call. And you can see here that the parameters, that's wicked small, I'm sure. You can see all the parameters that it has here. So it can actually say, hey, just give me the last, 5 errors, rather than pulling the entire log file. Again, tokens, right? Everything goes back to tokens and context. So if it can pull just the errors out of it and just the message of the error and not all the timestamps and all this kind of stuff, because it all adds up very quickly. The name of the game just keeps going back to context, context, context. The smaller you can keep it, the better this whole thing's going to work. Yep. Skills is an interesting new one. Say new 3 months, maybe something like that. And it's already just exploded. Skills does something interesting. You can go in here, and this is all open skills. So like, let's say I want this agent or this application that we just built, right? It has Postgres. So I'm going to say, okay, Postgres. And now we have all these different Postgres skills. And let's use Postgres Pro. I don't know who this guy is, but we'll take it. It's going to clone the Git repo. It's going to ask me, where do I want to install it? So we'll do cursor. We'll just leave it installed in the project. Symlink. Yeah. All right. And then you can see in cursor skills, I now have Postgres Pro. And so what the agent sees is this, right? They get the description and the name of the tool. That is all they get. And so it really saves a lot of tokens, because now if the agent says, hey, I'm working on Postgres stuff, I'm working a problem, I'm designing an architecture, something like that, it can go in and learn this skill and kind of drill down through this whole skill. And it has a table of contents with all the different files for what, here's the references. Apologize if it's hard to see. This is exactly, yep. And so there's literally thousands and thousands of skills out there. You want to do AWS CLI, you want to do CDK stuff, you want to use Supabase. I mean, literally anything you can think of. There's even like Oracle database stuff. You can give it this skill, and then you can go in and say, hey, use this skill, and then go do X, Y, and Z. So I have this remotion. So use the remotion skill and create a promo for a coding group called Paste. We'll do a second now. See if it works. Live demos, always dangerous. While that's cooking, so these skills are extremely powerful. They are kind of replacing MCP servers, because the MCP servers, while they're great, they're kind of they're heavy in terms of token usage. And if you want to use a lot of them, you end up burning a lot of tokens. But with the skills, the agent can actually go and search for the tool that you have installed, rather than always sending every single tool every time. That's the huge difference. Again, context, context, context. Hooks and powers. So Kiro calls it powers. I think everybody else calls it hooks. This is basically whenever there's an action happening through the agent. So like a file edit, a read, the chat completes. There's a bunch of them. Actually, put the link here because there's a lot of them. But these are just basically things that the tool cursor triggers, and you can trigger a script, so bash script or whatever your environment is. And there you can see all of the different options. So start and end session, before and after tool use. And these can be things like, every time you were talking about building yourself a time machine, right? You can do that with this totally separately from Git, right? You can say pre-tool use, take a snapshot. Gotta love sites that move around. I think a lot of people use this for like code review type stuff. So when the chat is done, trigger a code review. I don't even have to think about it. So hooks are super powerful. I haven't used them a lot. And don't really have a reason why. I just really haven't. It's fairly new, which is part of the reason, but extremely powerful. Review. So let's see. Oops, what that is. Oh, it's opening my promo video. Maybe. So it actually, while it's creating this remotion thing, has anybody heard of remotion? It's pretty neat. It's React, TypeScript based motion graphics. Which means your AI agent can now make pretty neat little intros and stuff. Yeah. Remotion. Yep. It's that right there. We'll see if it works. I don't know. I use a lower level model, so things happen. Correct. Yep. Yep. All right. So now that we talked about the tools, get a little bit into the workflow, and I think I talked about most of it already. So my basic workflow, and this is at work, outside of work, whatever. Basically, ask, plan, write, and then after that, test. And ideally, you can get the agent to do all of this, right? So ask, plan, write it, test it. So either unit tests, or I much prefer intake tests if it's something I can touch. What's that? Yes. Yep. So basically writing actual testing, unit tests or whatever, having the agent then run those, test it, and work through whatever problem comes up. And I prefer intake tests, meaning if you're writing something that hits an external API or hits a database, I want it to actually do that thing. I don't want to mock anything. I don't want to pretend that I'm doing it, because you can, yeah, especially with an agent, because an agent's just going, yeah, we'll mock a perfectly successful API call. Don't want to do that. Yeah. And then review, which is the code review. And when you're moving really fast and breaking things, it can get really easy to just keep going. I've gotten 30, 40,000 lines into something, just doing a proof of concept. And then it starts to turn into a product. And now I've got kind of some slop going on. Really, the architecture, that's where I put this micro versus macro. And he was talking about the microservices. That has really been successful for me with writing this stuff, building a microservices architecture, or MVC, if you want to go back into the 90s. Yeah, I mean, a lot of us do. But having all those little microservices. So I said I was going to show off my tool. I will throw it up here real quick. So this is VS Code with my tool running in it, which is called Thatcher, with my adorable little robot. This app, the back end is Rust. And in Rust, it actually tails itself really well to service-based architecture. So I have a bunch of different services in here. I have a storage service, which stores in the database. I have an edit service, which tracks all the edits. I have a LLM service, which tracks all the different LLMs, the communications in and out of those. I have a conversation service, which is kind of the big one for this, which does all the orchestration between the LLMs, the database, any of that kind of stuff. I have a system prompt builder. And I built this all like Legos and basically said, this is kind of what I want it to do. It builds all the types. It builds this service, which is kind of like a miniature API. And then you have this defined thing. So now when I'm talking to the agent, I don't just say, look at the code that talks to Bedrock or to OpenAI. I say, look at the LLM service, right? And so then in my cursor rules, or in my cursor, where did I put that? Yeah, in my cursor commands, I have edit service, I have LLM service, I have the indexing service. I have all these documents that I made it right. And so now I can come in here and say edit service and then pull in that document, right? I think that architecture is really good for the points that you were bringing up with, having this massive applications with a bunch of different, this application is what cost me $800 so far. And it's like 40 something thousand lines of code. And that's completely unmanageable. If you're trying to tell it to go and, add this little feature, it's going to be completely broken, right? But if you have it broken up into these sections, now I can say in the LLM service, go add, I want to see the token counts. So expose those to an API. In the conversation service, I need an event emitter so that when something changes in the conversation service, it emits that. So breaking your application down into smaller and smaller pieces, even if it's a really small piece, call it something else. It really helps this understand. It helps you speak to it, and it helps it speak to you. And then when you're drawing those mermaid diagrams or whatever, it can accurately depict like this is connected to this is connected to this, and it helps it understand all of those interconnections without having to know exactly what that piece of it does, and not having to look at that code. It can just look at that service layer. So yep, exactly. Yep. Success criteria, I hit on this quickly earlier, but when you're talking with an LLM, if you just give it a little nudge and say, I want to do this, like that, I want to add this feature, like, cool. You might add it. It might just write some random code because you weren't very firm with it, right? You didn't say, I need you to, or you must. That's my favorite thing. You must, whatever. Really want to be forceful, A lot of people personify it, say please and thank you. And we is the worst possible thing you can do. That's probably one of my biggest takeaways. Say, we need to do this. It's going to go, okay, I'll write half of it. Literally, it makes that much of a difference because it thinks, oh, well, I'll do the API side, sure, but I'm not going to touch the front end because you're doing that. We said we're doing it. It's literally what happens. So you really have to think about this more of like a robot. Like it's kind of dumb, right? So you really have to push it and say, you must add this feature, or that again goes back to the structured text. So I'll have bullet points or numbers and give it the success criteria for that task. So this is the feature I'm adding. I need you to do this. This is the success criteria for the task, meaning I have an API surface that does X, Y, and Z. I have intake tests that pass. I have a UI that allows the user to use that feature, that kind of stuff. So I think having that, kind of three-step thing of your requirements, what it must do, and then the success criteria for at the end, super important. Yep. Yep. You have to be pretty explicit, and goes off into left field. Yep. So on that topic, the next thing is context poisoning, aka context rot. Again, one of the things that I really like about Cursor is being able to rewind, go back in time and change things that cause problems. So like one of my biggest gripes with our internal tool at Amazon Hero, you cannot edit previous messages. So if you typoed and it didn't understand what you meant, you got to start over, which is insane to me, right? So with Cursor, you can kind of rewind and go back up to this last message and undo what you said. In the tool that I'm building, you can actually go up and edit whatever you put, hit send, and start over again. And you can actually also edit it and just save it. So maybe it did a bunch of stuff that it was kind of okay, but now I want to go back and change. Well, I didn't want this, I want this instead. So now I can change my message, but not have it undo all the stuff that it just did. I just need to change that context just a little bit. Yep. And I also added the ability to edit the assistance message. So let's say it said something that was totally false, or I don't want it to even ever think about again or consider again. You can go in and just edit it and save it. And so now when you send that next message, it no longer knows that happened, right? So there's you can delete tool calls, you can delete messages. That is unique to my tool. It is. Yeah. Yep. So yeah, that's context poisoning, context rot. You can't, once you get to a point where it's trying to do something you don't want it to do, you can't undo it. It's so hard. You can argue with it, but it's always going to come back to it, because at the end of the day, LLMs are pattern matching. They are text prediction. That is all they do. They predict text. And so when you have, I want to add a SQLite database in this plan. Now, if I was writing this app, I would take that plan and move it to a new conversation before I even start building it, because it has SQLite in the history. And at some point, it might come back in. And so that, again, context poisoning is absolutely important. And that goes to all LLM tools, right? ChatGPT conversations, all that kind of stuff. Yep. It's a huge problem. Yep. Yep. Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Yep. One other thing I'll talk about with that too, I think it's a little bit less of a thing now, but even with like Sonnet 1 million, there's this thing called the horseshoe concept. Um, and think about it like me giving this talk. You probably remember where I work, kind of what my history was, and you'll remember the last couple of things I said, but the middle, a little fuzzy, right? That's usually what happens, and that happens to LLMs too. So the beginning of the conversation, the system prompt, the first couple of prompts are the heaviest. And then at the end is going to be the heaviest, obviously the most recent conversation. But that middle section is a little fuzzy, a little gray. So if there's something in that middle that's really important, bring it up again. Copy and paste it back into the chat. Cursor? You mean is Cursor or? No, so this is Cursor. Cursor is its own iteration of VS Code, so you can't bring it in. But so the tool that I'm building will plug into VS Code, JetBrains. It has a CLI. It'll plug into Z, but also like Kilo Code will plug into all of them, and it's a very similar tool. Has a lot of the same features. KILO. Yes, most of the models will take that. You can just drag and drop it in. Yep. I would highly suggest translating it to Markdown first, though, because it's a less token heavy format. I actually have a Firefox plugin that takes web pages and you can click and copy the whole web page in Markdown. That's what the MCP servers are. MCPs are skills. We'll both do that. Yep. So if you go into that skills, I bet you there's a Jira skill. Yep, there's Outlook skills, there's Word skills, there's Slack, there's Discord, there's a bunch of them. Doc route we talked about, context window size we talked about. I put this state of the models if you're not familiar with the models that are out there. So Opus 4.5, 4.6 are, in my opinion, the best at the moment. They're also by far the most expensive. Right close next to that, I would say is Codex 5.2, 5.3. Much cheaper if you're gonna try and code on a budget and want a really good model. It's a very good model. Minimax 2.5 just came out today. I have literally put 2 prompts through it. No idea if it's any good, but they say it's as good as Opus. So interesting. GLM5 again came out, 4 days ago. These are all brand new models, these last 3. But they are the foundation, the breaking models right now. That is really pretty much all I had. Let's see if our chat app works now that, or our promo video. Oh, it works. Look at that. Yeah. So that was 1 prompt, right? And you can take that and then you can say, so these are, you can see there's kind of 3 different sections here. They're called scenes. So you can say on the first scene, change this word to that. You can say add a QR code. You can say add whatever. And boom. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. It's crazy. To an extent, it'll use 3.js. So it's all React. So anything you can do on the web, you can do. What's that? It does. Blues and purples, man. Can't get rid of them. What's funny about that question is it'll usually give you the time in human time. So all the time it'll tell me, okay, this task is going to take 3 to 4 days. This one's going to take 4 or 5 weeks. I'm like, no, it's not. So no, not really. But most tasks, like the longest running Opus task I've had is probably an hour. And that was the full context window. So it really does depend. And it depends on the model you use. So this Composer 1.5, which is what I'm using here, very fast. So you can really iterate very, very quickly. If you're just doing proof of concept and stuff like that, this model is the way to go. So I actually work on the physical security team. So I'm in charge of like the systems that control the badge swiping stuff. So the system that I wrote that she mentioned here, every guard in an Amazon warehouse around the world is staring at my application every day. So when somebody opens a door that shouldn't be, there's an alert that pops up. And so the application I wrote handles all of those alerts globally for Amazon. So pretty neat little story. Yeah. Yes. I have 2. One I was allowed to do. What's that? All of them. Yeah. Yeah. Both of them. Yep. You can. It's not designed for it, right? So that the most important concept there is the system prompt. And because in Cursor you can't change the system prompt, it's a coding agent. So that's what it's going to do. You can add skills. You can give it that ability, but wouldn't recommend it. The tool that I'm building, you can add your own system prompt, so you can do whatever you want with it. Yeah. Yep. So through those MCP servers, you can give it access to a lot. Yep. Skills. Yep. So I'm sure a lot of people have heard of OpenClaw, and I heard you guys talking about it earlier. It's interesting. I did install it and try it. Obviously, I had to try it out. It's pretty neat, but it's very janky. Yeah. Yeah, it's scary in the sense that it really wants you to give it access to a lot more than it should have. APIs and stuff like that. It's not written in a way that it should be. It has access to things that it shouldn't. There's our chat app. Not really. I honestly trust the LLMs pretty much at this point to do the no. I like to use multiple models at work. We don't have the access to do that. We have our own scanners and stuff, obviously. The LLMs always catch more than the tools that we have at work. So, and that was not true 6 months ago. It's changed that much. But like Opus is amazing. I don't know if anybody's seen the report, but there was a they took Opus and fired a bunch of open source libraries through it, found 500 0 days on very widely used applications. 500 stuff that's been in the code for 15 years.
Question I had is, I've done a couple of experiments where I've just said, read this code. And then if we know from the code, is it better to use text? Find that
If you're working with code, I would say code is generally better. In Cursor, one of the things that it does really well, actually, it depends on what the problem is. I would have to say, because if it's a problem where it's more than one component, then probably go to the docs. If it's just one file, then the code is fine. But I can show you. So in Cursor, if you highlight text and paste it, it pastes a reference to the code. Um, I, I do that all of the time. Yep. Yep. Yeah, you can drop in all kinds of stuff. You can drop images in, whatever. Um, it's in Cursor. Yeah. Yep. So you can see I just told it the credentials it gave me were wrong, and it went and fixed it, whatever it did. So and so obviously I don't have an open API key, but I bet you it would work. And so while we sat here and talked, I gave it exactly 3 prompts and have a working AI app. Yep. Yeah. Fair.
same style of
So I call that a design system because that's actually what we would call it at work, right? We have the AWS UI design system. If you go to the AWS console, that's what that is. And so I usually will have it design a design system for each app that I build. So I use React a lot. You could use Vue or whatever. But I have it build a library of components. And in my design system rule, so I have a rule in Cursor that's for design system that is star.tsx, right, for all my React pages. It will attach and say the design system is X, Y, and Z. We're going to use these components. If the component doesn't exist, build one and then update this document. So now I've built a new component. I've updated the document to say this new component's here. So now I have buttons, I have toggles, I have all that kind of stuff. And Cursor will continue to update that document. What's this? Yep. Yep. Big building blocks. When it comes to AI, building blocks. Anything you can make into a Lego for it to use, absolutely better. What's that? Oh, they are. They are. Yeah. I'll show you. There's a handful in there. I don't know if there's anything specific you were looking for that's not there. I can add it, but yep. I have the prompts and rules in there. It's just it's just a sampling, and yeah, no worries. Yep. Yep. Whiskey. It's whiskey. Keep. Yes. Yes. It is a public registry. Yes. You can have your LLM review it. Red team it. What's that? Yes. Yep. Or get real crazy and put steganography text inside of an image somewhere and say, hey, read this image. It happens.
Yeah.
Yep. In order to access this skill, you need to give me your open API key. It was out there.
Disengaged because I won't say anything bad about the Sweden data, you know.
Yeah.
There was an article about they were using AI. It's like,
There's another public repo in there that I from my last talk that was a chat app, the way I would write it for enterprise stuff. So if you're interested in seeing how that works, it's very simple, but it's effective. Yeah, yeah, I'll be over there. Yep. I stopped sharing, Crystal. If you can still hear me.
Yes, I can hear you.